Hello and welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about hands. So I was working on a portrait drawing recently and I had some trouble with the hands. I tried to edit and redraw to make it look good, but none of it really worked, and eventually I got frustrated and gave up. Now this wasn't my first time having trouble drawing something, so I knew what I needed to do. I went to the internet and searched for hand reference images. I got most of them from Pinterest because in my experience it's been more useful for gathering images compared to like Google Images. So I collected a whole bunch of hand reference images and compiled them in a pure ref file. And then I started doing some hand studies. This wasn't my first time trying to practice drawing hands, but it was the first time that I tried to be a bit more methodical about it. With all the references that I collected, and I did try to time myself while I was doing these. The hands can be complicated to draw, especially with all the ways the fingers can bend when you're grabbing an object or when two hands are interlocked with each other. So for starters, I tried to pick a hand that was relatively easy to draw. So in this one there's almost no bending going on. The fingers are stretched out a little bit and the palm side is facing us. For this one, first I drew the basic shape of the palm and then I drew the rest of the fingers. I approximate the palm as kind of a rectangle with a few modifications. It's a bit longer vertically than it is wide. It's not flat at the top, instead it's curved with the base of the middle finger being the highest point, and then it tapers off to the base of the index and the pinky fingers, with the base of the pinky finger being the lowest point. And it also tapers off around the outer side from the pinky to the wrist. In terms of measurements and proportions, the length of the middle finger is about the same as the length of the palm, and the index and ring fingers are just slightly smaller than the middle finger, about a fingernail's length short, and the pinky only goes to about the third knuckle of the ring finger. Now these measurements only apply when the fingers are straight, so when they're stretched out like this, you instead have to think of curves around the fingers where these measurements would make sense. Lastly, the palm has padded portions, so the base of the fingers, the heel of the palm and the base of the thumb are all padded, and the center of the palm is hollow or concave. And now for something a bit more complicated. So I said the first hand was relatively simple. The fingers were straight and slightly stretched out but still straight, and the palm wasn't obstructed by anything. It was all very clearly visible. So looking at this one, it should be clear to understand why that was simple. In this one you have some fingers that are bent. The ring finger, pinky finger and thumb are all bent, and the index finger is rotated slightly, covering up the middle finger. So why does this make it more difficult? Well, the rules about the measurements are harder to apply when they are bent like this. The pinky finger, for example, is only supposed to come up to about the third knuckle of the ring finger, but when it's bent like this, that rule doesn't really work anymore. The other thing is that it's generally harder to draw something when there's stuff in front that's covering up stuff that's behind it. So in this case, the palm is covered up by some of the bent fingers and the middle finger is covered up by the index finger. So in this case, I just drew the stuff that was on top instead of drawing what was behind it. So I didn't draw the basic shape of the palm. For this one, I more just drew the fingers and then tried to draw the palm around it. Same with the middle finger. I don't know if that's really the best way to go about it. Maybe I should have drawn the underlying stuff first and then drawn the stuff on top. I don't know that yet. I'm gonna have to experiment a bit to see. That's a similar thing to what I do in my gesture drawings too. I end up drawing stuff that's on top first. So for example, if there's an arm that's covering up the torso, I'll try to draw the arm first and then try to fit the torso around it. I don't know if that's the best approach for those gesture drawings either. Maybe I should draw the torso first. But that's something I'll have to experiment and try to figure out. So this hand, by the way, didn't really look good at first, but after some editing and redrawing, I think it managed to turn out okay. The palm is a bit off and the fingers aren't quite bent at the right angle, but at least it looks like a hand still, right? So in this one we have the back of the hand facing us, and this is a bit simpler than the previous hand, but not quite as simple as the first one, mostly because the thumb isn't stretched out in this one. It's slightly obstructed, and the ring and pinky fingers are curled inward towards the palm just a little bit. That makes it a bit more complicated, but it's still not too difficult, I feel. And again, because the back of the hand is clearly visible in this one, I just drew the basic shape of that first, and then I drew the basic shapes of the fingers. And once I have those basic shapes down, then I start editing and redrawing stuff to make it look correct. if the lengths are wrong or if the angles are wrong, I redraw stuff. The pinky finger, for example, was kind of wrong, so I ended up redrawing it completely. And when the fingers are bent, I find it to be a pretty useful technique to try and draw them section by section, because you can approximate or think of each section of the fingers as being a cylinder with different orientations. So if the fingers are bent, it's useful to draw them like each cylinder connected to the next instead of trying to draw them all in one go. Also, I feel like those extra details such as the wrinkles on the fingers and the fingernails are what really helps sell that it's a hand. Like, you do need to get the basic structure right, but even after that it doesn't quite feel complete until you have those final details. And the last thing to draw, since it's the back of the hand, are those knuckles. Kind of just draw a basic diamond shape for them, and I feel like that works fine. And the major difference between the back of the hand and the palm side is that the palm has those padded areas and it's concave at the center, while the back of the hand just has those knuckles, the first knuckles of the fingers, and if anything it's a bit convex compared to the palm. Now this is the second last one that I'll be covering, and I don't have a lot to say about this. I mostly just wanted to point out that this is probably the most difficult hand that I drew in this batch of hand studies, and that's part of it is because of its similarities to the second hand. So the fingers are bent in this one and some parts are obstructed by other things that are in front of them. But there's an extra complication here, which is that we are looking at the hand from an angle in this one. So in the previous ones we were either looking at the palm of the hand head on or the back of the hand head on. But in this one we're looking at it from a bit of an angle, and that introduces some perspective into the equation. That's most noticeable in the index finger there. It's coming out towards us and it's kind of foreshortened because of that. Now I'm not really an expert on perspective, but I do know the basic principles, and I did end up struggling quite a bit with the index finger. For this one I had to redraw it and try to edit it and change the length around because I didn't get it right the first time. And if I was trying to draw this from imagination instead of from reference, I would have probably done a much worse job of it and it would have looked terrible. But thankfully I'm not really at that point yet, so I can just use my regular method of comparing with the reference and trying to fix mistakes. And I think that made it look pretty decent in the end. I also tried adding those shadows in the dark areas and I think that looks pretty good. Just makes it pop, you know. So yeah, it was kind of a difficult hand, but I tried to approach it like how I would approach any other hand, and it kind of just worked out, thankfully. Okay, this is the last one and I actually just have nothing to say for this one. I just wanted to throw it in because it's a thumbs up. It was kind of fun to draw. I don't know, something about it being a thumbs up just made it a bit more fun than all the rest, which were like random hand positions or whatever. So I'm just gonna let this one play out without any edits at like 5x speed, so you can see the entire process with all the mistakes and the fixes and the detailing and all that. So hopefully that will be fun. And before I forget, leave a thumbs up if you like the video. Ha 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 ha. Anyway, enjoy.